What's the address?
Kimberly, it's 2 Blake Street. There's a fire. Sonny was Sonny's in his room, and I don't know. He did something with the TV. I was sleeping.
These flames or smoke?
Yeah, come on, Steph, come on.
Okay,
Please, we need an ambulance.
ma'am. All right, you said something's on fire, and now you need an ambulance. What's going on there? Did he get injured? Is he on fire?
Yes, he's injured. Please send an ambulance.
Okay, what's your phone number, just in case we need to give you a call back?
Stepson is in here.
How many other people? Listen,
That's it. I have 2 cats.
Everybody's out?
Yes.
But your stepson's still inside?
Yeah, he's right here.
Okay,
yes.
come out. Come down the road. Come on, come on. It's not safe to stay here.
Imagine living just inches from freedom, yet unable to reach it. For 2 decades, Kimberly Sullivan's stepson did just that, hidden away in a suburban home, until a single spark changed everything. In February 2025, life was completely unremarkable in Waterbury, Connecticut. But all that changed on the evening of February 17th, when a fire broke out in a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, prompting firefighters to make a run for it. Even before they got there, they had to fight a ferocious fire while they dealt with what turned out to be a tragic find.
To a house fire. They found a middle-aged woman and her 32-year-old stepson who claimed he'd been kept secret his entire life.
A man so thin and gaunt, with weight of just 68 pounds, was found in one of the bedrooms. His body was marked by clear signs of years of neglect. He was almost skeletal. He had lived there, unseen and unheard, locked away from the outside world for years.
Male victim who disclosed that he was being held captive in the house for an extended period of time, approximately 20 years.
At first, this was deemed an unfortunate accident, but that soon changed. Investigators soon discovered truly terrifying details of confinement, starvation, and isolation among 20 years of claims. This all revolves around Kimberly Sullivan, a woman now charged with imprisoning her stepson for most of his life. But what had truly happened behind those walls? What was found was more horrific than anyone might imagine. Kimberly Sullivan lived in Waterbury with her husband, Craig Sullivan, their 2 daughters, and Craig's son from a relationship before. What appeared to be an ordinary family from the outside had something terribly wrong behind them. 2 bankruptcies filed by Kimberly and Craig bedeviled the home within 5 years. It was an awkward time of personal and home pressures due to overdebts and less money to achieve ends. Through neglect, the boy suffered during his early life. He was definitely malnourished. As a child, he stole food, rifled through garbage cans, and appeared thin to his teachers, who became sufficiently concerned to report their suspicions to child welfare services. Social workers made a home visit. However, the boy had been coached to say everything was fine. After perhaps 2 visits, his name faded away from school records. He was permanently withdrawn from the system and fell off the face of the earth. For the next 2 decades, he was a phantom. His existence became entirely concealed, only known to those behind closed doors. The authorities didn't step in. There were no questions raised. For 20 years, perhaps no one knew the macabre horror coiling like a serpent behind that closed door. During the evening of February 17, 2025, a home in Waterbury burst into flames. Fire crews responded quickly, anticipating a typical fire. What they encountered within was much more alarming. Among the smoke and confusion, a man was found in a second-floor room. His body was gaunt, skin hanging on his bones, and his weight appallingly low for a man his age. He was removed from the blazing house, his legs barely supporting him. As emergency workers treated him, they discovered that this was no typical victim of fire. His physical state indicated years and possibly decades of extreme neglect. The detectives were soon able to get to the bottom of the story. The fire was not somehow a freak accident. It was a fire intentionally started. For the man, years of isolation and starvation had pushed him into sheer desperation to escape the confines of his longtime prison. The truth of what had happened to him sent shockwaves through the community. For more than 2 decades, he had lived in a cell. He had attended no school beyond elementary education. He had been deprived of medical treatment, adequate descent, nutrition, and even human socialization. That fire was not a cry for help, it was pure survival. As the investigators pursued deeper into the details of the victim, a terrifying truth came into plain view. He had been isolated from the family for over 20 years, confined within a room 8 by 9 feet, shut away from the rest of the household. There was no furniture, no proper heating, and no access to very basic sanitation. He was locked up in the room and allowed out only in controlled environments, hastily for about 15 minutes on a certain day. With no food whatsoever, he lived off scraps from the garbage, or, alternatively, from drinking toilet water. His body showed all the signs of a starving existence: protruding ribs, decayed teeth from years of neglect, and wasted muscles from virtually no movement whatsoever. Investigators were unable to find a dental or medical record pertaining to him, on account of the last 20 years, which showed he must have been entirely cut off from the outer world. Inside the house, though full of people, he was treated as if he did not exist. His half-sisters had friends, went to school, and lived normal lives while he stood in hiding. When visitors came, he had to be silenced and go unseen. Trying to escape or call for help was punished instantly. For years he suffered in silence, trapped in a place where no one could hear him scream. Only after the fire, his last bid for freedom, did the truth about him finally come to light. The scale of his abuse was now undeniable, and authorities were beginning to uncover just how horrific his past had been. The victim was rescued, and police launched an all-out investigation into the Sullivan household. Initial medical evaluations indicated severe malnutrition, dehydration, and muscle atrophy consistent with many years of confinement. He painted an even drearier picture of his physical status with his statements to police about the nightmare he had been through. Investigators scour the house, further coming upon more evidence of neglect. A very small room, the one in which he had been kept, was dirty and sparsely furnished. No real bed, no personal belongings, just something of a cage that had been his prison. A lock has been placed on the door, and the windows are boarded up to prevent him from escaping. The neighbors were shocked.
If he were at that window and would have just tapped and said, "Help me," of course I would have been like, "What's going on?" I would have called the police.
Many admitting they didn't even know the victim at all, through all the years they lived beside him. Others had only blurry images in their minds of a missing boy many years ago, but none had ever imagined the horrible truth. There had indeed been child welfare reports from the early 2000s indicating missed opportunities and unchecked signs of mistreatment that allowed Kimberly Sullivan to maintain her hold on her stepson for decades. Thereafter, Kimberly was arrested in another couple of days. Multiple counts of abuse, neglect, unlawful imprisonment, and reckless endangerment were put against her. She claimed that she was innocent and that the victim had been free to leave any time he wanted. But the heavy evidence told a different story, one of isolation, cruelty, and a life snuffed out. Then came another question bigger than all. How can people have lived under this way of torture for over 20 years? Kimberly Sullivan's arrest rocked Waterbury and beyond. The case was one of the most disturbing cases of prolonged abuse that had ever happened. But there were many other uncovered details that made the victim's life sound even worse just as the prosecutors were stitching their case. Kimberly was charged with a number of offenses, including unlawful imprisonment, first-degree assault, intentional cruelty, and endangering the welfare of a dependent adult. Prosecutors aligned themselves behind the assertion that she had methodically isolated and controlled her stepson, robbing him of any reasonable claim to be treated as a human being. Yet she maintained her not guilty plea against a barrage of evidence, having only stated that she had never done anything wrong and that the victim was never held against his will. The more facts came out, the greater the public outrage. How was it that no one had ever detected this? Where could an entire individual disappear for decades without someone doing anything to help them? Social services and law enforcement were under an intense glare for not paying attention to what took place over an extended period of time. Reports from the early 2000s indicated investigations were opened by child welfare workers, but never followed through on. The system failed him. As the trial date was looming, the speculations turned into a debate among legal experts on the chances. Some felt Kimberly could be looking at life behind bars for her conviction, while others seemed to feel that her defense team would argue diminished responsibility. Meanwhile, the victim was trying to rebuild a life snatched away from him. The courtroom battle was just beginning, but certainly, one thing was accurate. The world was finally listening to a voice that had been silenced for more than 2 decades. The world followed the trial with rapt attention. Kimberly Sullivan's actions were laid bare, but whatever damage she had done just couldn't be undone. The victim, now aged in his late 30s, had to pick up the pieces of his life after 20 or so years of being made to live like a balloon in an exhibit. Cellophaned, to be displayed but never touched. He had no education, no work experience, and almost no knowledge of the world outside. Specialists were working to restore him physically and mentally, but the scars, those from both sunshine and shadow, would stick forever. The case reignited conversations about the failures of child protective services and the dangers of unchecked abuse. How had an entire person vanished without authorities stepping in? How many others had slipped through the cracks of a broken system? Investigations into past welfare reports led to renewed calls for reform, ensuring that cases like this would not be ignored in the future. Kimberly Sullivan's fate rested in the hands of the justice system, but no sentence could undo the years of suffering her stepson endured. For him, freedom had come at a devastating cost. The world had finally heard his story, but the question remained, was justice truly possible after so much had already been lost? Enjoyed this story? Hit like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling true crime adventures.